I first entered this in 2018, I actually didn't know where to send anything. And I'm sure the resources were there, but I couldn't find them. So what I started doing was contests. But then that's pay to play, right? So you pay a fee, you enter. Oh my God, that first year, I had a few things, but the pay to play, I lost almost $1,000 and didn't get one winner in any of those contests. And some of them were sort of scammy, right? They're predatory. You don't even hear back from them. You don't do anything. So that's a shitty way to do it. And as a journalist, I thought, man, this learning curve is so steep. I'm going to start keeping track of and cataloging what I'm doing so other authors, they won't fall into the same holes I am. And it's a skill I have, right? I can take a skill that I have and take a skill I'm trying to learn and combine them. Plus, I love asking questions. So what I started doing is researching the markets.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 306 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. In today's episode, I have an interview with Angelique Fawns. Angelique is a journalist and speculative fiction writer. She works full-time making television commercials for Global TV in Toronto. She writes fiction for fun and uses her journalism skills to promote editors, publishers, and authors. She has her own podcast, Read Me a Nightmare, where she features short, dark stories and interviews with creatives from the industry. She lives on a farm north of the city of Toronto with her husband, daughter, horses, cows, far too many cats, and a potcake rescue dog. Her first short story sale was to Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine. We have a conversation about her writing, her work for television, and all the great stuff she does sharing markets that are available for other writers, and that's coming up later in this episode. First, let's hear a word about this episode's sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Findaway Voices. Findaway Voices is a marketplace where you can find a professional narrator to work with, but Findaway Voices is also an audiobook distribution platform. You can find a way to find your own way using Findaway. That's a bit of a tongue twister, and if you're a longtime listener to the podcast, you may remember some of the fun tongue twisters that Will used to make me do as part of the Findaway Voices ad reads. Twisted by the, twisted by the, twisted by the, twisted by the, twisted by the fool, twisted by the fool, twisted by the fool. Such a fool. All right, here is this episode's tongue twister. Amidst the mists and fiercest frost, with barest wrists and stoutest boasts, he thrusts his fish against the posts, and still he... Okay, I can't do it. All right. He thrusts his fists against the posts, and still insists he sees the ghosts. Wow. It seems so much easier when you hear Bill say it or you read it in the Stephen King novel. Now, the last two lines of this poem are used effectively in the original novel by King. It's used quite a bit, and it's a powerful tool against Pennywise the Clown. Now, the latest movie adaptation only uses it in a few brief scenes, but many folks have heard he thrusts his fists against the posts and still insists he sees the ghosts. Now, this is a phrase that's stuck with me since having first read it when I was a teenager. And I'd read somewhere that those lines are from a poem called Drunkard, which kind of makes sense when you think about hallucinations either from alcohol or from the detox of the cold turkey process. Now, this tongue twister segment of the show is sponsored by Findaway Voices. If you're tired of thrusting your fists against the posts and are looking for a solid solution for creation and distribution of audiobooks where you are in control, Such a fool. But you don't get that when the professional narrators that you find through Findaway Voices. You get pro narrators, unlike myself, people who never twist their tongues, or if they do, well, that ends up on the cutting room floor. So you can find a professional narrator through Voices Marketplace. You can also use Findaway Voices to distribute, and you can choose where you want to distribute to. You can choose the prices that you send, both the retail prices that you control and the library prices, because there are some differences there. And if you want to see how you can leverage Findaway Voices as an author, you can check them out over at starkreflections.ca/Findaway. Now, as mentioned in last week's episode, I'm on the road this week. I am in a hotel room, which is where I'm recording this from. So, not the best. I do have my mini Blue Yeti mic, which I take when I travel, but I am not in an optimal acoustic place right now. But I will be getting to some comments. There's some interesting comments that have come up over at YouTube, youtube.com/MarkLeslieLefebvre, which is where I post the straight feed as part of the RSS feed for the podcast. And it goes back to the episode about AI, where I had Elizabeth on, and we talked about that. And so interesting stuff that I want to raise, because I do want to share, numerous sides to the AI debate and discussion, so that we can get those conversations out there. So I appreciate the folks who shared their thoughts, and I'm going to want to share them in a future episode, probably episode 307. But right now I'm just going to skip right into the interview. But before I get to the interview, I do want to pre-reflect about something here. This episode contains two different opportunities that Angelique offers, and I want to make sure you're aware of these opportunities. So if you write macabre things, Angelique's podcast, Read Me a Nightmare, is an opportunity for you to be put in front of people who enjoy scary stories, horror, etc. So it's a great free opportunity for writers. And if you are featured on her podcast, like I was just recently, be sure to share links on social media, because you want to support the podcasters who support you and support those people. So sharing that around so she can get more downloads, more listens, etc. But it also is another free vehicle for us authors for promotions. That's one thing. And then the other thing is that she has a free newsletter, as well as the book she talks about, where she provides detailed markets and the pay and the rates and stuff like that. So if you are looking to sell some of your shorter works to some of the more speculative sci-fi, fantasy, horror, etc. markets, she's sharing a lot of great information that can be very useful for you as a writer. So just right there, two really great opportunities for writers. But without further ado, why don't we get into my wonderful conversation with Angelique. Hey, Angelique, welcome to the Stark Reflections podcast.
Hi, Mark. I'm thrilled to be here. Huge, long time fan.
It's so funny that we've kind of played in the same circles in different aspects of our lives with writing, edumacation, all the things,
Everything. Yeah.
and yet had only met recently through was it Wolf Moon's group? Is that how we met?
Yes, I took his marketing seminar, and I actually took it specifically because you were the guest. I'm like, oh, I gotta listen to this guy, and
That's cool.
obviously it worked out. This is great.
Well, and it was kind of funny because while we were doing that live call and the interaction and chat, I'd learned about some of the cool things that you did, and I thought, oh, this would be awesome for other writers to hear about. But before I jump the gun, let's go back to who is Angelique Fawns, or not Angelique, right? I can go with all the pronunciations.
You can go either way. Once again, as you know, very few people can pronounce my actual name. So Angelique, we allow it to be Englicized. Use that term.
But who is she really?
Who am I really? I mean, I don't even have the answer to that, but I can give you the bio. I am somebody with a background in journalism and TV. So my day job is broadcast. So I've spent, I'm aging myself here, but the last 25 years working at Global TV.
Okay.
So I've been writing as a career for 30 years probably, because I went to university, I got my journalism degree, did some freelance writing, and then got my job at Global TV, and I write all those commercials that you see. So whenever you hear,
Yeah.
actually I cut them too, but Big Brother Canada, I've done that for a long time.
Do you do like the
911
promos for
promos.
TV shows on Global, or
That's
promo
what I do.
for different things that Global? So Global TV for any non-Canadian, like Canadians know Global TV.
Right. We're one of the biggest, one of
So
the top three.
non-Canadians, what's Global TV?
So basically we rebroadcast all the top programs from CBS, Fox, NBC. So top shows people would be familiar with. I did Chicago Fire for years, which is now moved off our roster, but 911, NCIS,
Okay.
FBI.
But also has its own, Global News is a huge broadcaster for Canada, right?
Absolutely. So I didn't end up going into news. I definitely went
Yeah.
into, I found early on, Mark and I actually went to the same school, right? We went to Carleton for journalism. And I learned actually while I was in journalism school, I always thought I could make a true story better. So I prefer not to be constrained by the truth.
Oh my God. Well, what most journalists aren't really constrained by the truth. But
Well,
I mean, I learned that too. I mean, I wanted to go into journalism. I wasn't smart enough to get in. Kudos to you that you got in.
once again, I'm not
But
trying
I
to
learned
we're
journalism
smart
wasn't
enough.
what I thought it was, because I was more interested in creative. I mean, and I know journalism can be creative. It was being snarky.
It's simply more fun to make stuff up than report the facts. That's
Then have to stick to the truth, right? Like when I do my nonfiction,
boring.
the true story, ghost story books, I actually try to stick to journalistic integrity and report the facts as they were.
That's right. I read
reported.
them. You did do a good job. I
Yeah.
actually went, I actually did think you were a journalist when I was reading those books. So
I tried to be one like you. So
yeah, there you go.
So, but you got into this part with Global. You got into creating promotional scripts that were made into video. Obviously working
That's
with
correct.
a team there.
Well, I do it myself actually.
But you do the video editing as well as
I
the
do. I
like
write.
you do those. Tell me about the
You
process.
can direct all of it.
Yeah.
All of it. What's the process? The process is, let's say, okay, well, we'll do my recent campaign for Big Brother Canada, which we have our star, Arissa. So I sit down with a wonderful team. I mean, trust me, I don't do it all on my own. Right. There is a wonderful team working with me, but we'll sit down with the team, the graphics artist, my creative director, myself, Canadian production. We came up with concepts, and then I wrote a script. It got approved, and then we went and we do a shoot with Arissa, and she read the lines, and we captured that all on film. And I don't always get to work with an editor. This time I did, because it's such a huge project, and it's very important because it's our own product. Okay. Right. Big Brother Canada is a global show along with.
Oh, right. Yeah. You have access to the talent. Whereas if you're doing NCIS or whatever.
No, sometimes we do, but then it's usually somebody else is shooting it for us out in, LA. But sometimes we used to get them at Global. I mean, I've shot with some cool people. I shot with Donald Trump. I got him to say, "You're fired," for when we had
back when The Apprentice, yeah.
And a few other, Mark Harmon I've worked with a lot of the stars.
You worked with Mark Harmon. Oh, cool.
I have. Now, once again, it's usually just watch NCIS on Global.
Yeah. That's true.
We're not doing complicated shoots, but very fun, very nice, down to earth people.
But that's how you get the celebrity who probably does that for every local station where they're in a studio and they record. Hey, Toronto, you're watching. Hey, Vancouver, you're watching. Yeah.
Right. Well, sometimes, sometimes now that we're a national network, we usually we do it specifically. We don't usually slide off to our news does that. We don't really do that. But it's fun. So I'll get my footage together and then I'll edit it, pick my music. We have wonderful voice talent, so I'll get them to do the voicing. Kelly Pigeon is our voice. Oh my God, he's amazing.
So you've got like the radio kind of voice.
Yes, we've got the dupe ones, and then he actually does some reads for my podcast. I thought,
oh, does he really? Oh, that's cool.
I've been so lucky that he'll volunteer his time with me. But anyway, that's what I do. It's quick turnaround, it's fun, and it's writing. So, but my dream was always I wanted to write fiction. I mean, didn't we all grow up wanting to be Stephen King or Anne McCaffrey or right? I mean, that was sort of the ultimate dream because, like you, I'm a book nerd. I must read 3 novels a week. If I'm on vacation, it's a novel a day. Like, I just love to read. Wow. So I've always wanted to create what sort of I love. But life gets in the way and you don't have time. I didn't start writing until 2018, not fiction. tons of
Really? Well, wait a
journalism.
second. So, but you've been working in journalism and writing your whole life, but writing
Yes,
fiction for fun, you didn't start till 2018.
I didn't start it till 2018. Just
Really?
everything's so hectic, I have babies, I have a farm, I have a daughter, farm. And then my job it's high pressure and it's a lot of work. And then I was
Yeah.
doing journalism on the side, like some
Wow.
freelance writing. So it was just too hectic. But dun dun dun. One day I woke up at midnight and tripped over my dog and shattered my ankle.
Oh,
Oh,
that doesn't sound fortuitous at all. That sounds like a nasty thing.
I know, but don't we always look for the silver lining? So I said to myself, if I am forced to sit still and not move for 3 months,
Right.
it's time to write. I'm going to finally attempt this dream of writing fiction.
Wow. Okay. And you are like myself drawn to the dark shadows apparently, right?
It seems most of what I write seems to slant that way. I'm trying to be more positive. I think there's probably enough darkness in the world, but yeah, I definitely enjoy and love consuming horror. Like I love horror movies, horror books. Like I like
Right.
consuming the darker stuff, but I like an uplifting message at the end too, right? We don't want to all be mired in gloom.
Well, I remember early in the pandemic, for this podcast, I was talking to Kevin J. Anderson about writing dark stuff during a dark time, and he said, "Here's the thing: in our fiction, we can control it. The monsters can be vanquished. The good guys can win. Good can prosper over evil, and you control it. Whereas what's going on in the world, we have no control." And I thought, oh yeah, right. Because oftentimes, when you pick up a horror novel, now there are exceptions, but usually they're not always Hollywood endings. But usually the good guys win. Usually the protagonist, achieves their goal and things like that. I know in one of the examples, and they changed this for the Running Man TV show, but in the original novel by Stephen King writing as Richard Bachman before he was known that was his pseudonym. In the Running Man, the main character is a spoiler here, spoiler alert, but in the novel of the Running Man, I think he's in a helicopter and the bad guy is in this office tower and he's about to crash anyway. So he directs the crash landing. So he flies right into the office building and kills the bad guy. So he dies, but saves his family and gets the bad guy at the same time. So it was like this really, really dark, obviously in the Arnold Schwarzenegger Running Man with Richard, what's his name from Family Feud? The host of the Family Feud,
I know who you're talking about.
the game
Anyway,
show host guy. So it was kind of a funny thing. They really made it campy, and of course, in a Hollywood movie, that you can't have that kind of ending, so they tweaked it. So again, two spoilers for the price of one. But
there you go.
but your fiction. I think we were talking earlier, and you were saying that was it mostly short fiction that you write?
So I've only managed short fiction. I would love to write longer, but I seem to, it's my attention span goes, or I'm just not used to writing or doing anything in long form. So my life is I write 30 seconds, 15 seconds, 10, 7, 5.
Right.
I'm very short form, right? Broadcast.
Okay.
Journalism, short. So it's a real stretch for me to try and take my skills and extend. In fact, every criticism I've had, I've gone on a few writing retreats. It's always like, you have to learn to expand, right? Nobody accuses me of purple prose.
So that's interesting. I want to dig into that a little bit. So you have a extensive boatload of experience taking a full hour-long program or a series and
Mhm.
distilling it down to 30 seconds and
Exactly.
giving them like a tight Reader's Digest. There's no extra fluff or fat or any of that stuff. It's just really lean and bam, here's the thing.
That's
And
correct.
so it is hard to write short fiction and provide this value, this content in a very, very tight. So obviously you're applying a skill that you're really good at
It's
because you
probably why
have
I
to
find
do.
short fiction easy. I
Yeah.
do find it easy. I don't find it's not. I mean, it's a stretch to learn to do things correctly, and I have a real problem. I like to write active present, right? Broadcast, active present,
Oh my God. Yeah.
right? So this whole using the past tense, she went, he returned. It's very difficult for me. That's one
So
of my
do you
biggest.
actually write active present, or do you write?
I do both. I do both, right? I mean,
Okay.
I have put out a lot of short stories. I probably have 40 published, and I've probably written, I don't know, 60, 80. I don't know how many I've written, because there's quite
Wow.
a few that I haven't had purchased yet. And some are active present,
Okay.
some aren't, some are, right? Some
Wow.
are a mix. This is bad, but some of them are a mix of all.
So you talked about selling them. So where have you found markets for short fiction? Is that still a thing nowadays?
Oh yeah, it's huge out there. Is this you giving me my like lead? Because I think you know the
Just
answer
a
to
slow
this.
pitch to you
I
here.
was just thinking, I'm pretty sure you know the answer to this. But, um,
Hey,
all right.
don't let people in on my secret here. It was
There
just a
you
nice
go.
lob right down the middle.
I was just thinking, there you go. So I'm going to start from the beginning, because it's a
Okay.
very good place to start,
It's like
isn't
a
it?
storyteller, yeah.
Yeah. When I first entered this in 2018, I actually didn't know where to send anything. So, and I don't, I'm sure the resources were there, but I couldn't find them. So what I
Right.
started doing was contests,
Okay.
right? Like, but then that's pay to play.
Oh, a
A
lot of
lot
them, yeah,
of
there's some sort of
pay to
entry fee,
play,
right? Yeah.
right? So you pay fee, you enter. Oh my God, that first year, I mean, I had a few things were published. I can get to that after, but the pay to play, I lost almost $1,000 and didn't get one winner in any of those contests. And
Oh,
some of them were sort of scammy, right? The predatory. You don't even hear back from them. You don't
yeah.
get anything. So that's a shitty way to do it. And as a journalist, I thought, man, this learning curve is so steep. I'm going to start sort of keeping track of and cataloging what I'm doing, so other authors won't fall in the same pitfall. They won't fall in the same holes I am.
Yeah.
And it's a skill I have, right? I can take a skill that I have and take a skill I'm trying to learn and combine them.
Right.
Plus, I love asking questions. So what I started doing is researching the markets. And the very first thing I created for myself, dun dun dun, the God of all guides.
You
So
got about what is that, a guide for markets?
all the speculative markets
Get out of the city.
listed in order of what they pay. So when I
Really?
submit a story, I will start with, like, we got the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, Clark's World, Asimov's, Analog,
Okay.
all the top ones. And I have all the information any author would ever need in
Wow.
order, how much it pays, do they take simultaneous submissions? And
Okay.
then I researched online and wrote what they're looking for, what their rules are, whether they want to read about zombies, don't want to read about zombies.
Okay.
And then I will put in sort of what sort of rejections I've received back from them. So I started doing subbing. Like, I think I've sent, oh my God, 30 stories to fantasy and science fiction.
Right.
And remember C.C. Finley, Charles Finley? He was the editor there before Cherie took over.
Yeah.
He used to write the most marvelous rejections. So I
Oh,
have here where he would say what I love about the story, what I don't love.
yeah.
Anyway,
Well,
yeah,
that's a sign. When an
yeah.
editor takes the time to do that, it usually means they see something in your writing that's worthwhile, even
Yeah,
if they reject you. Oftentimes, yeah, it's a tough one, because having edited, I know you
getting the
don't have time.
personals
Yeah,
is,
that's
yeah,
really
pretty important.
critical. Yeah.
Well, I was actually lucky, because I'll go back to breaking my ankle in 2018. I subbed a contest, but I also subbed to a few magazines I knew. Like, I used to write or read growing up Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine.
Oh
Well, they
yeah.
bought the very first story I ever wrote.
Ellery Queen, like that's a huge market. That's
Bought my first story. I didn't
wow.
even know. I didn't even know at the time it was
You
a
sold
two.
your first story to Ellery Queen. I sold my first story to a magazine. It was like, circulation 250 people, got paid $5 for it. You
I
went to, like, Ellery Queen's like one of the top pro markets
I
out there.
know. I just was
Wow.
lucky. And they put me in the department of
There
first
had
story.
to have been some skill in the storytelling, I'm sure, to get there.
Well, I think I'm a natural storyteller
Right.
because degree in journalism, writing promos, and then I've written lots of features
Yeah.
for articles. So it's not like I'd never written before. I just hadn't written in this
Right.
mark before. And it was just, in a way, it was luck, because now I'm learning all the rules. I'm like, oh, okay. I was just lucky it worked. It was one of those stories that was in my head. I
Yeah.
actually told it from the point of view of a woman with dementia who was looking for her sister.
Okay.
And yeah, it just sort of rolled out.
Wow.
And my best stories do just kind of roll out. But anyway, this is what I created for myself.
Okay.
So I would
But
take
wait,
my
can other
story.
people buy it?
Yes, you can. It's or you know what, and if people can't afford it, I give it away for free. I've given away like 300 of these, and a
Wow.
few people have bought them. It's like 99 cents on Amazon. It's
Yeah.
not, I don't ask for much, a little more for
Right.
the paper one.
Well,
But
the
anyway,
paper one actually costs money to produce, so
that's why I
yeah,
don't get much. Like I'll give myself $1 if people buy it. I don't
yeah,
ask for
yeah,
much, but it's because I just want to help, right? It's to help people.
yeah.
And for me, it's so useful because I'll send to all the top markets. And then after it's been rejected, some story of mine, then I go down and this goes in order. So at the back are the lower paying markets.
Yeah.
So I hope eventually they'll find homes. They don't all find homes.
So that's a process you run through. That was something that was advised to me when I first started. Is you start with the high paying markets,
Yeah.
and then you work your way through them, and then you go,
Hit the
okay,
lower
what it's now 8 cents a word is pro rate. So it used to be 5 cents.
Yep. And then Clark's World, of course, pays like 12, right? So you always want to start
Whoa.
with Neil. You want to start with Neil Clark, then you work your
Yeah. But then it goes down to like maybe 5 cents a word, 4 cents a word, 3 cents a word, whatever,
two
et cetera,
cents
et
and then
cetera. Yeah.
token 25, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
$25 or
Flat fee, or even, and then, well, do you play with reprint markets as well?
I don't really because I tend to take my own stories and then podcast them just for
Oh,
fun.
so
So
tell me about that. So you read them now? You mentioned a voice talent you worked with as well,
so this is sort of what's interesting in my industry. Some of the producers I work with are burgeoning voice talents.
right?
So it gives them a venue to cut their teeth and read things. And then
Right.
Christy Stewart, who used to be a voice for Prime and Global, I think she's got the best voice like in the universe. But
Yeah.
anyway, she's retired now and she was thrilled. I asked her once if she'd read something for me and she loves it. So she's read a bunch of my stuff and she's phenomenal. Professional voice actor.
Oh, wow. So
Like she's
she's
like,
someone that a writer might be able to hire to do their fiction.
yeah, absolutely. I'm sure she would do it, but
Wow.
I'm blessed. She's just volunteering her time because as you might know, podcasts are not highly it costs me to run it. I'm not making any money.
They're not lucrative. Yeah.
They're not lucrative. You have to put it a
Yeah.
different way. It's interesting. So, oh, and I also reprint my own stories. So, but wait,
Okay.
there's more. This is the
Okay.
first book.
All
Here's
right.
here's the second book. I have 3 books in this series. There's the story behind the stories,
Oh, okay.
publishers behind the pages.
Oh, whoa,
So,
whoa. Okay, neat.
so these books, I reprint my stories. So you'd find my Ellery Queen one in here, 3 calendars. But then because I'm a journalist, when I was selling these stories, I'm like, well, who are these people buying these stories? What do they do? Do they have day jobs? Are they making any money? Why
Right.
did they buy my story? Right? Like you have
Right.
all these questions and you don't usually get them answered. So what I did is I would interview everybody who bought one of my stories. Like I
What?
interviewed Janet Hutchings, yes.
Get
I
out of
interviewed
here. That is
if
so
if
cool.
you buy my story, I will interview you.
Oh, wow. Okay, so people can get an insight into the editors who are purchasing for these various markets.
Yes. So what I did is I would interview them and then I'd also tell the story of the story. That's why I call it the story behind the stories. So for example, invasive species, which was purchased by Scott Knoll for DreamForge. And actually that was where my whole writing career changed, but I can talk to you about that after. I think it took me over 2 years to sell that story. Even there was places that bought it, and then I thought the story was so good, and I thought, well, they're not a paying market or it's royalties, and then I'd pull the story back. So I'm like, this doesn't feel like the right home. And
Right.
then when I found Scott, actually, because I was asking him permission if I could put his rejection in one of my books,
Right.
he said, I'm starting a new project. It's called DreamForge Anvil. If you want to send me a story, I'll work with you with it and we'll use it in our, issue number 1.
Wow.
And meeting Scott was just amazing. But so I have that whole story in the book of Scott and how he helped me and how he helped me take the story that was almost there and then turn it into something that was pro market or semi-pro
Yeah.
market worthy.
It's what a great editor does as well, and they see the
Oh,
talent and then they work with you.
yeah.
So hang on. So the story behind the story is a collection of your previously published fiction with an interview with and the story about the publishing of the stories?
Yes. So I talk all about the person who bought it, what they do, whether they make money, if they have a day job, and then our process with the story and how it came to print. So
Okay,
it's a
that's cool. No, that's the it's not just recycling, but you're creating this whole other thing. So it's good for readers who can just want to enjoy the story, but maybe like the director's notes or commentary. But then also that's just for readers, but then other writers can look at the story and then break down what that relationship with the editor was and how the editor maybe distinguishes what they're going to pick. I mean, it's a really great research tool for writers too.
I think it is, because I thought, why should they suffer through some of the stuff I suffered through? And then I put in, like, for example, invasive species got some very funny rejection letters. Like,
Yeah.
I've been eviscerated a few times. Not everybody's kind out there in the world, right? So I thought, well, if somebody's feeling really down because somebody sent them a note like, here's one for me, this story makes no sense. That was one of my favorite ones. That's
Yeah.
all the editor wrote. Rejected. The story makes no sense. I put that in there. So if a writer's feeling discouraged, I thought, well, maybe my story will make them feel better because I've found some success, right? I mean, I don't make a lot, but maybe I make $1,000 a year selling short stories, and that's better than a kick in the head. So,
Well, yeah, and that's just short fiction when you think about that, right?
yeah,
Because here's the other thing too. You're working a full-time job. You have a
yes,
family. And oh
yes,
yeah, by the way, you manage a farm, which is
yes.
not like sitting back doing nothing, right?
No, they want to be fed every day, those silly animals.
Well, don't you have to wake up the rooster before the rooster wakes up the sun, right?
Well, I got rid of all those chickens for that very reason. Yes.
Okay. Wow. So you're doing the short fiction on top of a full,
Yeah, life.
more than full workload, right?
Yeah. My
Because
family.
I don't do the farm thing. I just go to the grocery store and get the fresh Ontario fruits and vegetables that someone else did all the work for. Okay.
It's a lot of work.
Oh, wow, that is amazing. So how well the question I have for you isn't why haven't you written, long fiction? The question is how the heck do you have time to do the short fiction and all the other stuff that you're doing here?
I work a lot of hours. Like right now, instead of on a Monday, instead of actually my family's out riding
Right.
at
It's a holiday here in Canada. A lot of people are off work.
Oh, right. It's Easter Monday. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, no, I was working on a story this morning. I'm talking to you now. I'm, concentrating on this other part of my life, just in case, right? It's a dream. I just don't want to die and say I never tried it, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
It's part of, you turn a certain age. That's why I'm like, how come I haven't written any short fiction yet? I've got to try. I'm running out of time.
Yeah.
So, and I don't want to die and go, I should have done it and I didn't. So that's why I'm doing this. And I'm very motivated to find the way. And here's the thing, and here's something a lot of writers would probably like to know, which I'm still searching for. And I think you might have found the answer to. Where is the money? I do not buy that there's no way to make money doing this. I don't buy it. It's
Right.
work, it's a valuable product. I'm not just going to accept it's just art and I'm just expressing myself. I mean, it's fine if people want to do it that way. I want to find out how to make this profitable. There are writers who make money.
Yes, there are.
I want to be one of them. I
Right.
don't see why I shouldn't be. And
I
I
think
don't see why anybody else who's willing to work hard enough can't be.
and I think that you already expressed this earlier and you just expressed it right there, working hard enough. But also it's the thing you've already experienced in the short fiction market, and you talked about it with DreamForge and that story, is you submit to a market, it didn't work. You submit to another market, it didn't work. You submit to a market, it looks like it would work, but it didn't feel right, so you didn't go with it. You didn't
Right.
take that first nibble. You're like, nah, it doesn't feel strong enough. It doesn't feel good. You cast again and you keep trying, you keep trying. The one thing we can never control, and this is the thing, is you can do all the right things, you can have all the talent in the world, put all the marketing effort, everything in. The one thing that nobody ever talks about, nobody ever expresses is, oh yeah, and there's this thing no one can control called luck.
That's right.
Right? You get the right editor at the right time, or for the right market, for the right story. But if it's the wrong day for that editor because they just spilled coffee on their lap just before they looked at your submission, they're in a foul mood, and something that would have been amazing 13 seconds ago, the lucky number 13 is now a bad thing. Like
Right.
luck can be that fickle. And that's why, in my humble opinion, that determination and not giving up and just keep trying is one of the ways to get to success. It's like the more lightning rods you plant, as Kevin J. Anderson expressed to me years ago. The more lightning rods I plant, the luckier those lightning strikes seem to be. The more often those lightning strikes seem to be.
It's completely true. I mean, when you read biographies by Stephen King, Janet Ivankovich, the one thing, the message they blare is, I think I'm successful because I didn't give up.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Like how many authors do you hear the stories of rejections, 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 right? Like the Harry Potter series, like
Yeah.
you just have to punch through.
Yeah.
You have to not quit, I think. Well, because for sure you're going to fail if you quit. So at least if you keep going, and then it's interesting to see where your trains take you. So I asked, of course, it broke a cardinal rule. You're not supposed to respond to rejections. But then I just said to Scott Knoll, my God, he writes beautiful rejections letters. He's such a kind man.
Yeah.
He wrote this beautiful rejection letter. I'm like, I'd like to use it in my book to have your permission. Right. And that started that. And then in DreamForge, I met Wolf Moon.
Right.
And then took his seminars, and he's got gold for the starting writer. He can really tell you clearly how to set a story. He's got a really good thing going on for beginning authors.
Yeah.
And then he had you on that marketing seminar, which has now put me in contact with you, which, like I said, I'm hugely excited because I've been following your work and seeing your name everywhere. And my God, here you are.
Here
You're
we
right
are.
on screen. Who knew?
Here we are. And here's the funny thing. So when we finished that seminar, I went and I checked out your website, and then I immediately signed up because you also have a cool thing for authors. You have this newsletter, right?
You never know what's going to hit.
Yeah.
This is what's interesting. So I wrote these stories. Here, I'll show them again. I wrote these books.
Yeah.
They don't do anything, crickets, right?
Yeah.
So I now put little nods to them in my blog, and now they're selling. I'm not selling a lot.
Right.
Maybe 15 a month or something. Like
Right. More than most when you actually look at the grand scheme of things. But this is because you have the blog, which has market updates and things like that for writers?
Yes. I'll talk about the blog. So
yeah,
I create the blog for myself. All those markets you see there, they're the ones that I researched that I find interesting. Right. They're the ones I want to submit to. You're sort of looking at my to-do list every month. Yeah. And then what I do is same as this book, I don't want to have to be all over the internet and disorganized looking for all the details for every submissions call. So I put it all in one spot.
Right.
Here's the call. Here's what they're looking for. Here are the hints from the editor that I found on the internet. And then, because I've been doing this now for so long and been slapped around, I'll put in my hints, or this person has rejected me 27 times, but I've learned he really likes dark whatever, or make sure you don't put your name on the manuscript because they really hate it if you don't do anonymous submissions. And so I'll put the hints I've learned. And for example, A. Jiang, as you know, she just is a Nebula finalist. She's the editor for Wilted Pages that just came out. This is a cute little dark academia anthology that's coming out, and she's also the editor of Orion's Belt, which is a pro-paying speculative online mag. Well, I've interviewed her twice. So what I'll do is I'll put my links to the interviews so people can actually go read the interviews where I've asked her, what are you looking for specifically? What do you hate? So my blog posts can help speculative writers find exactly where they want to submit their stories and then give them hints. And then I do it by month because I find that's the easiest way to organize it for me. This is what I'm going to do in April. This is what I'm going to do in May. And it seems to have caught on. People seem to love them because it's an easy way to have everything in one place.
So for writers who are interested, this is mostly speculative fiction, meaning speculative fiction would be a generic overhauled overarching term for science fiction, fantasy, horror, right?
Well, there's more. There's more. I'm also interested in crime.
Oh, so, that's right. Yeah, Ellery Queen. Yeah.
Ellery Queen, Alfred Hitchcock. There's Tough Magazine. There's some lower paying ones out there.
All right. So mystery, crime,
I'm interested
noir.
In that.
Okay.
And if I find a literary journal like the 3 Penny Review or something that pays really well, that I personally find interesting, I'll throw that in too. Basically, whatever I find interesting, You
Okay.
will find there.
So this is potentially the markets that you would read from, most likely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Wow.
then anybody who's, I don't know, and the high paying ones, right? High paying, no fee. I now have a rule. I will not submit to anything that asks me for money. I just
Right.
can't. I lost too much money off the top.
Yeah.
And it just seems wrong to me because we're not in this to
Right. Well, you learned that,
the hard way.
made those things that happened to you, and now you're helping other writers, and by creating that curation and saying, we're not putting these in here because I don't want other writers to be out of pocket in that way.
Well, and I also want them to know, that story, let's say I sell a story with something I've sold recently. Oh, I wrote something called the Survivor House promos. I wrote basically a sort of dark, murderous reality show, but I wrote the story like scripts, like I would for work.
Right.
I probably got that thing rejected 20 times,
Yeah.
right? But then it just got bought by this new magazine called the Tower Magazine, right? And I'm really excited. It's a really neat magazine. It's a paying market. It's new. And then I think if I put this stuff in my blog, other authors will know I'm getting the shit rejected out of me. Like what looks like success when you look at my works page and there's piles and piles and piles of publications. I probably got whacked so many times before somebody bought it. So it also can give them hope, right?
Yeah.
Right? Rejectomancy, right? It's
Well, I love that. So along those lines, for anyone listening who's just near the beginning and they're scared about rejection, or they're not sure, or they've been rejected or had got a bad review, what would you advise them to consider?
I think they just have to. This is so hard. Don't take it personally. It's not personal. Like you said, the editor could have just spilt coffee on his lap. Or, and I found this out a few times, you know who that editor is? It's some guy or gal in her parents' basement apartment who decided they were going to put a call out for this magazine, and they're rejecting you, and they're not really somebody whose opinion you might worry about. They're not, these people giving you ours are not the gods of the world who are bestowing upon you that your work isn't any good, right? It's just one opinion, and it might even be from somebody you wouldn't buy a drink from, right? Like you wouldn't take their advice normally. Or they might be wonderful people like Janet Hutchings. I've started listening to the Writers of the Future podcast.
Yeah.
And John Goodwin, there is an episode called Topingo Canyon, I think it is. And they're talking about how there was this guy who was submitting. He only got rejections. He didn't even make a sale. But what he didn't know was behind the scene, all these big editors, fantasy and science fiction, Asimov's, Pulp House, they were talking about him. They were sitting around having drinks going, who's going to be one of the first people to buy Topingo Canyon's first story? Because they thought he was great. And he was, breaking through was here. And
he never knew that this was going on, right?
And he quit.
What?
He quit. He never broke. He didn't.
Oh.
He stopped writing, and then started up again. I think it was a decade later, and won Writers of the Future. He started resubmitting to that contest, and then found out that there was a professor someplace teaching a cautionary tale called Topingo Canyon, and it was about him. There was a whole university course that was a cautionary tale about this guy and how he quit right before he burst through, right at the tipping point.
Wow.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, the things you don't realize, right? And obviously they wouldn't have talked about this author unless they saw that there was like, who's going to be the first to buy, because they saw the talent, that they recognized it was there. It wasn't quite right at this moment. The story didn't work. But
or it just might be they already had a alien invasion story that month in the magazine, or they had too many mermaid stories, or right? You never know. They could think it's fantastic. But I once had a rejection letter from, what was her name? I wrote a story, and it just recently got published, but I wrote a story about a cat on a bike. It was cats on bikes in space. Cannot remember the name of that editor, but she does series of cats and something. And she said to me, I love this story. but I just bought one just like it. So sorry.
Yeah, the
Right?
similar premise, so I can't do that in the same issue, or I can't do that in the same
Yeah.
anthology. Yeah, I've had to make that the difficult decision where I was like, oh, this is a great story, but I just did one that has too many of the same elements. I know it's a different story, but yeah,
Yes, it's just not going to fit, or it's the theme, right? 34
yeah,
Orchard, Christy Peterson Schoonover. She is another, talk about those editors that are like the bright, sparkling diamonds in your, you're in
yeah,
the coal mine, right? You're in the
yeah,
void, you're in the coal mine, you're digging, you want to get somewhere, and you find the little tiny diamonds. She's another one of the little diamonds. She rejected so many of my stories, but she always sort of gave me hope. She's like, you're almost there, you're not quite there. And then she actually did line edits of some of these stories I sent to her. She spent
wow,
a remarkable amount of time.
yeah.
And she just finally bought one of my stories, Part the Clouds, the angels are singing. I finally sold a story to Christy.
That's
It'll
awesome.
be out in her April issue next year of
Oh
34,
wow.
which is a dark, unsettling magazine. But she's wonderful. I've interviewed her a couple times, and I finally did it. But she was saying, you just aren't there, right? You just not quite, right? She said themes emerge, and she doesn't know what the theme's going to be, which is why my story's not getting published till next year,
Right.
because it's going to fit the theme of what she has planned for that issue.
Yeah. Which is a lot of planning ahead and a lot of patience and a lot of persistence, right? A lot of those things that are really important elements to get to that level of success. So for my listeners who are curious to check out all the cool things about you online, where can people find you online?
www.fawns.ca.
And that's FAWNS.ca.
Yes, that's my last name, like the baby deer with an S,
There you go.
Fawns.ca. I gave up the French name when I got married and took the easy to spell, easy to pronounce. I also have a Facebook page,
Okay.
Angelique Fawns author. And then the podcast, which you can find everywhere, Read Me a Nightmare. And that's the same idea as the books. I do the same
Read Me
thing.
a Nightmare.
Read Me a Nightmare is the name of the podcast.
Yeah.
It's got a great intro. You should listen to the intro. I had our professional voice read it.
Ooh.
Oh,
What I'll do is after the credits in this episode, I'm gonna for my if with your permission, I'm gonna add the intro to your podcast right after the end credits so that people can hear it.
sounds good. Or I'll just email it to you to make your life easy.
Yeah, well, I would have
Uh,
liberated it off the web, but yeah, sending it to me would be great, and I'll tack it on at the end.
there you go. Then they can hear it. But I do the same thing. I try to. I have the story read, usually by one of my voice. I don't like listening to my own voice, but by a professional voice actor or somebody who
Yep.
wants to be a professional voice actor. And then I've interviewed Scott, I interviewed Jane. Sometimes I interview the voice actors, and then people can learn how they became, right? If somebody's interested in voice acting, I've then interviewed Christy or Kelly, and they talk about how they found their success. So I was trying to do the same thing, right? We're trying to build brands, aren't we, Mark?
Of course we are. Always, always be selling, always be closing, always be building your brand.
That's right.
I will have links to all those things that you mentioned in the show notes at starkreflections.ca. Angelique, thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
Oh, you're welcome. And by the way, can I get you on my show?
I would be honored. All right, we'll talk soon.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so as you heard at the very end of the episode, and I did record this episode a couple months ago. I'm way behind in getting the interviews out. I'm slowly getting caught up, trying to. But I was on an episode of Angelique's Read Me a Nightmare podcast just last week as I'm recording this. I'm recording this on May 24th, 2023. And last week's episode of her show, episode 33, featured my short story Browsers, which is kind of about basically it's a bookstore that acts like a Venus flytrap for book nerds like me. And so that's read by Eric Brian Moore. Wonderful story. Eric does a great job of it. And of course, then Angelique and I talk about that story and writing and then writing short fiction and tips and ideas for how you can leverage short fiction for money. So I think it's a pretty good episode, not just because I'm in it, but we talk about some really cool things if you're interested in selling short fiction. And I should mention that episode 33 of Read Me a Nightmare, there'll be a link to that in the show notes at starkreflections.ca. Now, in terms of reflections on the interview, there's a couple things I was thinking about. And it was one of the things and Angelique talked about was the comments from editors, what that means and why it's so important. And I remember that being such a major thing. Even if my story was rejected, oftentimes getting a comment, knowing that the editor took the time to make a comment made a huge world of difference. But I also learned later on that the reason why an editor will make a comment is the editor probably saw something either in you, through the cover letter, etc., or in your voice or your story. They saw something that had substance, and they wanted to just give you a little bit. They wanted to encourage your ability as a writer to not give up. And so having edited anthologies, hundreds and hundreds of submissions, you don't have time to make comments on things. So if an editor takes the time to handwrite, or it used to be a rejection form that was just a form that they checked the boxes going, not for us, just sold a story like that, wrong liked, whatever the problem was, and that would be it. And sometimes if even they wrote a few words rather than just their signature, that made the world of difference. And so if you have submitted fiction out into the world and you've gotten any sort of comment, no matter how short or small, that's usually a sign that the editor saw something valuable in you. And that's something really important for you to remember, particularly if you have sent stories away and have not yet sold those stories. So that's really important. I'm still blown away that, Angelique sold to Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine for her very first sale. My first sale was $5 to a digest, probably with a circulation of 500. Now, Ellery Queen has a gigantic circulation, so that's what an amazing accomplishment. Whereas my first 100 submissions were rejections. So that was kind of cool to knock it out of the park that early on. But the last thing I want to reflect on is just the way that she has transferred her skill in her experience writing basically what are short teaser features for ads for other for programs that Global TV runs. And they're meant to be micro short. They're meant to be, think about this is kind of like the blurb writing. This is like the blurb that sells your book. So she is a professional who does this for a living. And I'm impressed by how she can speak in audio bites, in those sound bites. She can share things in those teaser bites that make you want more. And it's obvious she's adapted that into her writing and into even the use of active voice more often. I did listen to one of her audio, I think it was one of her earlier, a horror story about a fan, about hearing this voice coming from a fan, a rock star's voice coming from this fan. And it's really brilliant. It would make an excellent episode of like Twilight Zone or Alfred Hitchcock Presents or any of those shows like that. And again, it's one of those stories that's just so compelling and you just can't stop listening to it. I mean, I was listening to it rather than reading it, but that was such a really, really great experience. So in any case, I just think it's important when you look at where you have skills and abilities and experience that are maybe, well, in this particular case, it is directly related to entertainment, storytelling, and writing, but she's able to transfer those skills into her writing. And there's always a way that we can adapt some of the things that we take from outside this very specific writing storytelling realm and apply it. So what are the things that you can take from the day job, from your experience, your personal experiences, etc., that you can then re-adapt? I'd love to hear some of those things that you've done, because it could be interesting fruit for discussion for another episode of the podcast, or even just in the comments over at starkreflections.ca for this episode, over on YouTube where this gets posted, any of the places where I can find those comments at least and be able to, share them with other listeners on a future episode. But that is it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. And a huge special thank you and shout out to all of the awesome patrons who support this podcast over at patreon.com/starkreflections, where you not only get to be part of an elite, awesome team of wonderful folks, but you get access to additional additional content that I share for my patrons. And again, a huge shout out and thank you to my patrons, and thank you to all my listeners. Thank you guys for being here. It means a lot to me. I do look forward to hearing your own reflections in comments, etc. And other than that, this is the end of episode 306. As always, until next week and next episode, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.
Welcome, lucky listeners. Grab yourselves a hot cup of... Tuck yourself down deep into the covers and make sure the lights are on. It's time for Read Me a Nightmare.
Welcome to episode 33 of Read Me a Nightmare. I'm Angelique Fawns, your host, and today we have a special guest that I'm very excited about. Mark Leslie, a fellow Canadian and prolific author, sits down with us today to chat about his methods for making money with short stories and advice for all of us newbie writers. Our story today is a creepy and beautiful short called Browsers, written by Mark Leslie and performed by Eric Brian Moore. You might never enter a bookstore the same way after listening to this.